Hello, welcome back to Cracking the Cryptic, where today we really do have a special edition for the channel. We're going to study a brand new Sudoku technique. I certainly have never ever seen anything like this before. It's coming to us by email from a guy called Derek Neal. And I have to say it's one of the most interesting email exchanges I've had since we've been running the channel. And literally, I have not seen anything like this. So let's talk about how we're going to work. We're going to look at this puzzle on the screen now. I will put a link in the description so you can try this puzzle yourselves, but I'm going to just illustrate to you how difficult basic techniques find this puzzle. The simplest way to do that is to go and find a solver. So here is Andrew Stewart's solver, which is one of the most popular on the internet. You can see the puzzles in there now, and let's see how the solver says we need to go about solving it. So you can see that the first thing it's doing is finding pairs here. It hasn't found any single digits to put in, so it finds some pairs. The second thing you need to do before you can put in any number at all is to find a swordfish, and that's not easy to spot as the first step in a puzzle. And then after that, whoa, a fairly complicated X cycle that I've got no idea how you'd spot that straight off the bat, that's for sure. And from then on, well, then on you get some numbers, okay? So hopefully, I mean, this is clearly a diabolically rated puzzle and very, very complicated to get your head around using normal techniques. Now, what I'm going to try and do now is explain Derek's technique to you, and then we'll see how it works in the context of this very puzzle. Okay, so on screen now we've got a representation of the starting position, and the first thing we need to do when using Derek's technique, which he calls the slot machine incidentally, and he calls it the slot machine because you never know what the technique's going to give you. It can give you nothing at all, or it can give you ways into horribly complicated positions. So it's like a one-arm bandit. Now, what we do first is we find a number in the grid that occurs exactly 3 times. Now, in this particular puzzle, there are quite a few options to choose from here. You can see if you study it, there are 3 1s, 3 4s, 3 8s, 3 5s, maybe 3s of other numbers too. But that's the first thing we need. We need a number that occurs 3 times. But then we need to be careful, because we need to identify that the number we're looking at is only occurring once in each set of 3 rows, columns, or rows and columns. So if we look for example at the 5 here, you can see there's no 5 in either row 2 or row 3. So that in terms of the first 3 rows, we've just got 1 instance of the 5. In terms of the next 3 rows, we've just got 1 5. The next 3 rows, 1 5. Now this is important, because what this means is that in effect, the way Derek described it, these numbers now form a closed loop. So by reference to the open 3x3 areas, so let's look at this 3x3 area in the top left-hand corner, for example, this block is affected by 1 of the 5s going vertically and 1 of the 5s horizontally, and that's true for every single area that doesn't have a 5 in it. Now what that also means is that when we start to identify possibilities for where 5s might go in the open areas, they are having the maximum effect, because they are they're having an effect right along rows, right along columns, and forcing other things to happen into the 2 remaining open positions. So yeah, this is the starting position that we need to think about. And then the next thing we do is we make pencil mark notation in the open areas to indicate where the 5s can go. So you can see on the screen there, and this has been kindly provided to us by Derek. He put this together last night to help me explain it to you guys. So thank you very much, Derek, A, for coming up with this incredibly interesting method, but also for doing a lot of the work for the video for us too. So you can see now we've highlighted the 5s. It's slightly more extensive than Snyder notation because in some boxes we've got 3 5s as possibilities, and in some instances that we'll look at later you can even have 4 digits pencil marked in a 3x3 box. But for the 5s in question, this is what we end up with. And the next step is that we pick one of the 5s in one of the boxes and we imagine it's true. So you can see from the diagram here, we're going to guess that this is the correct 5. Now it's not too difficult to see how this works. If this is a correct 5, obviously this square here will be a correct 5. This will be a correct 5. This will be a correct 5. Therefore this will be a correct 5. And look what that does in the middle 3x3. If this is a correct 5, this will also be a correct 5, and we have a clash. So immediately, with this particular number and this particular selection, we'd be able to say, okay, well this 5 is wrong, therefore this 5 is true, and we'd be able to immediately deduce the positions of 3 5s in the grid. So you can see here that we'd immediately be able to get this one, and also this one. We'd still be left with some 5s unsolved, but we've certainly improved the position somewhat. And remember that this is a puzzle where the computer needed a swordfish to do anything, whereas this method has already given us 3 digits very, very quickly. But let's imagine that you didn't start with the 5s. So this is the start position again, but this time we're going to use a different digit that's occurring 3 times in the grid. We're going to look at the 1s. And again, you can see the 1s meet our criteria. They're only occurring once in each set of 3 columns and 3 rows. So let's imagine this time we start down here. We guess this one is correct. You can see from the arrows here, this is indicating how the eliminations work. So if this is correct, we eliminate this one, and this would be the correct one. So circles are telling us that this is an implied correct 1 as a result of our starting guess. Now you can see here that rather than getting a contradiction, in fact these 1s completely fill the grid. And you may say, well, can we just go with that then? Well, no, we can't, because we haven't really proved anything. We've proved this number is possible, but it's also quite conceivable that this number will work. So the next thing we need to do is to test. If we find we get this situation where we manage to actually get the chain to work through the grid, we must test the other possibility. And rather interestingly, when we try to start the chain with this one instead, it also works. So you can see what's happening here is this one, this one, this one. That forces this one to be correct, this one to be correct, and this one to be correct. And we get another sequence of 1s through the grid that also could be correct. Okay, so here we have both of those grids showing how the guesses for the 1s worked through. And what you can see, if you look carefully, is there are certain squares highlighted in red that were never part of the correct chains. So we know these squares that marked in red are all not possible for the 1s. Now, the interesting thing about this is not just that we've managed to eliminate these cells to be 1s, but these cells are all, and the way Derek describes it, is an elbow cell within a 3x3 box. So if you look at this 3x3 box, the one that isn't possible is always the sort of, it's in between the other 2. Similarly, if we look at this box here, this one sits at the elbow between the other 2 cells that are possible in the chain, and this is always the case. I.e., if you get 2 loops that work, where you start with one and then start with the other, if both ways round work, it'll always be the elbow cells that don't work. And Derek describes this as being due to some sort of symmetry that exists within the grid that the elbow cells disturb. And I'm still thinking about that to get my head around it, but I think I sort of understand what he means. Now, one thing I do really urge you to do is if you are enjoying this video and enjoying thinking about what we're talking about, then do in the comments add to this this discussion, because I think that this is an extremely interesting area. Certainly if there was a PhD for the development of knowledge towards Sudoku solving, I think we could all agree that Derek should be awarded the doctorate, because this is genuinely interesting stuff. So just to show you in a slightly bigger diagram how the ones work in terms of the elbows, if we are going to select an elbow cell and say, okay, well, what happens if we were to start with an elbow cell? So this would be a 1, 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 and whoops, this would be a 1, and we would get a repeated 1 in row 4 here. So the interesting thing about this, I guess, also is that if you do decide to start your chain not with a 3x3 box that contains just 2 possibilities, but with 3 possibilities, you should never start with one of the elbow cells, because the beauty, I suppose, of finding a loop that works in both directions is that in this puzzle you'd actually be able to eliminate all 3 elbow cells in one stroke. So you'd be able to eliminate this square, and this square for the cost of just 2 chains. Whereas if you start with an elbow square, obviously you get to remove 1 pencil mark digit, but only that 1 pencil mark digit. Now, before we get overexcited, I suppose, and all immediately convert to this method, there are situations where it's less potent. So if we now look at the 8s in the puzzle, although the 8s do meet the criteria that we've talked about from the starting cell, you can see that the pencil marked 8s are rather more numerous, and in 2 of the 3x3 blocks we actually have 4 pencil marked 8s. And if you try and chain the 8s in this example, you find you can't really make much progress. The chains just don't extend far enough. And in this situation the slot machine isn't really going to pay out. Now, Derek suggests if you do have a puzzle where there's only one 3x3 containing 4 possibilities, you can still salvage a result from the slot machine just by starting your chain in that area, in the problematic area, and seeing whether that takes you, in the hope that you can actually start to eliminate the 4 cells down to 3 cells, down to 2 cells, in which case you may be able to go further from that point. The last thing I want to talk about is a situation where, and this is a new puzzle now with a slightly different configuration, where we're looking at 1s, and this is a situation where it might at first glance appear that you have a problem. So you can see that we've pencil marked the 1s, we've started in this square, and in the central 3x3 box we've run into an issue because both of these 1s in the circle are possible, and in the top box here you can see, although this starting 1 eliminates this one, we'd also have these 2 positions as possible. So it looks like we've got an issue regarding what we can tell from the chain. But what Derek is keen to point out in this situation is that this is salvageable. Because you haven't got the situation where you've got 4 possible 1s in 2 boxes, what we can do in this situation is to take the region where the problem arises, so this central square, and we can make a guess in the central square as the starting point for the slot machine. And let's see what happens if we do that. So here we pick this cell, and this forces a 1 into this square, this square, this square, this square, and this square. So we get a contradiction. These 2 1s would both end up in the same position. So actually what we can do as a result of that is say this 1 is impossible, cross it out. That means one of these 1s is true, and the moment we do that, all of a sudden we get 1s as well. We can enter 1s, because that means this 1 must be true. If there's a 1 in one of these 2 squares, this one is not true, so this is true. This is true, and all of a sudden we get a couple of 1s into the grid. And this final position shows what we could achieve. So absolutely fascinating stuff. And I do as I say, I really welcome comments on this because it is completely innovative. I've certainly never seen anyone else ever suggest starting Sudokus in this manner. Now, Derek's very honest. He says you don't know what happens as a result of this. Sometimes you get nothing at all, and sometimes it breaks open puzzles that, you'd need some very, very difficult logic to get through in a different way. And we saw an example of that at the very start, where we were looking at a puzzle that required a swordfish just to even make any progress, and the slot machine came up trumps. So really very, very interesting, and I really thank Derek for getting in touch with us to show us his technique. We'll be back soon with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic, and as I say, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Do subscribe to the channel and enjoy the content. We appreciate it.